Right after Jesus had said these words, he said, you know, you are light. Don't put your light under a bushel.
Nakon što je Isus rekao te riječi, rekao da nemojte staviti svjetiljku ispod.
Then he said something that when you look at the rest of the gospel seems almost, well, you wonder if it's really what Jesus said.
Kada vidite ostala evanđelja, pitate se da li je to zaista ono što je Isus rekao.
The passage says, do not think that I've come to abolish the law.
Ovaj redak kaže, nemojte misliti da sam došao ukinuti Mojsijev zakon.
Neither the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but I've come to fulfill them.
Ili naučavanje proroka, nisam ih došao ukinuti, nego ispuniti.
And then he says, I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of the pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished.
Istino vam kažem, sve dok postoje nebo i zemlja, ni jedno slovo ili zarez neće nestati iz zakona, dok se sve ne ispuni.
Now, if you read the Gospels,
kad čitate evanđelja,
it seems that Jesus broke the law time and time and time again.
Može vam se činiti, vidite da je Isus prekršio zakon mnogo puta.
Let me give you some examples. He did not observe hand washings like the scribes and Pharisees said he was supposed to.
Na primjer, on nije održavao pranje ruku, kao što su održavali pismoznanci i farizeji.
Many times in the Gospels we have Jesus healing people, making people well on the Sabbath.
Mnogo puta u pismu vidimo da je Isus ozdravljao bolesne baš na subotu.
I want you to know that as far as the Jews were concerned, he was tried, he was condemned, and he was crucified as a lawbreaker.
Židovi nam to ovako prenose, da on bio žrtvovan kao onaj koji nije izvršio zakon.
Now, because of all of that, there have been some scholars who have said, I don't believe Jesus really said this.
Zbog toga postoje neki teolozi koji su rekli da ne vjeruju da je to Isus rekao.
I think perhaps Matthew put this in, and it's not really the words of Jesus.
Mislili su možda to samo Matej stavio i to nisu ni Isusove riječi.
Maybe this just aren't correct. Jesus surely did not say this.
Možda to zaista nije točno, sigurno to Isus nije rekao.
But when we really understand what he was saying, and we read the rest of the Sermon on the Mount, indeed, we read the rest of chapter 5, we decide, hey, of course he said it. He had to say what he said. It was inevitable that he said this.
Ali ako čitamo dalje i čitamo cijelu propovijed na gori, vrlo nam je jasno da to zapravo rekao.
He said, I did not come to abolish the law.
On je rekao, nisam došao ukinuti zakon.
Or the prophets, I've come to fulfill them.
Ili proroke, došao sam ih ispuniti.
Now, perhaps it's important for us to back up and say, well, what do we mean by law?
Možda trebamo malo otići unazad i pogledati što znači zakon.
The Jews in Jesus' time had 4 different kind of understandings or meanings of the law when they heard the law.
Židovi u Isusovo vrijeme su imali 4 načina kako su razumjeli termin zakon.
In its strictest sense, it was the 10 commandments. You'll find this in Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 through 17.
U izlasku 20 ćete naći da je ono označavao 10 zapovjedi.
Now you know the 10 commandments.
Vi svi znate 10 zapovjedi.
And so sometimes when they said law, they meant these commands.
Nekad kad je bilo rečeno zakon, mislilo se na tih 10 zapovjedi.
Sometimes when they used the term law, they were talking about all of the first 5 books of the Old Testament.
Ponekad kad se koristio termin zakon, mislilo se na svih 5 knjiga Starog Zavjeta.
Some call it the Pentateuch.
Neki ga zovu Pentateuch.
And that word simply means the 5 scrolls.
I ta riječ znači 5 spisa.
If you were to get a Jewish Bible, and it's been translated into English and others from the Jews. The Old Testament is made up of 3 different books.
Ako idete čitati druge prijevode i vidjet ćete da su Židovi preveli na engleski, onda ćete vidjeti 3 različite knjige.
The first book is called Torah.
Prva knjiga je nazvana Tora.
And this book contains the first 5 books of the Old Testament.
I ta knjiga sadrži 5 prvih knjiga Starog Zavjeta.
And so often when they said the law,
I često kada su rekli zakon,
they meant everything that's in Torah.
Misle su na sve što označava Tora.
Now, even some of the Jews in Jesus' day did not accept the rest of the Old Testament.
Čak i neki Židovi Isusovo vrijeme nisu prihvaćali ostatak Starog Zavjeta.
The scribes, those who were not the Pharisees but the scribes, as a rule, they did not accept the Psalms or the prophets as inspired Old Testament.
Pismoznanci u to vrijeme nisu mislili da su psalmi i proroci nadahnuta knjige.
The Samaritans did not accept the rest of the Old Testament, but they did accept Torah, the first 5 books.
Samarijanci nisu uzeli u obzir ostatak Starog Zavjeta, ali su poštivali 5 prvih knjiga, Toru.
Now, when they would say the law and the prophets, they meant the whole of the Old Testament.
Kada su rekli zakon i proroci, mislili su na cijeli Stari Zavjet.
And you remember that Jesus said, you know, I did not come to abolish the law or the prophets.
Sjećate da je Isus rekao da nije došao ukinuti zakon i proroke.
And usually when that phrase is used, it means the whole of the Old Testament.
Kada se taj termin koristi, sjetite se da on znači cijeli Stari Zavjet.
You remember, after Jesus was crucified and was raised, Luke tells us that there were 2 people who were walking to Emmaus.
Sjetit ćete se da kad je Isus uskrsnuo, Luka rekao da su bili 2 učenika s njime.
We don't know whether they were 2 men or a man and his wife or 2 women. He just says 2 people were on their way to Emmaus.
Mi zasigurno ne znam da li su bili muškarac i žene, ili 2 žene ili 2 muškarca, bili su samo 2 ljudi.
They were heartbroken because their Messiah had been crucified.
Imali su slomljeno srce jer je njihov Mesija bio žrtvovan.
Some had said that he was raised from the dead, but they had a hard time believing it was true.
Neki su rekli da je uskrsnuo, ali su i neki nisu mogli povjerovati u to.
But Luke says as they were on their way, a 3rd person joined them and began to explain from the law and the prophets who Jesus was.
Ali Luka nam daje izvještaj da to 2 ljudi kada je šetalo, 3. osoba im se pridružila i počela im je citirati i govoriti o zakonu i prorocima.
And the next verse says he explained to them the whole of Scripture.
I sljedeći reda kaže da im je objasnio cijelo Sveto pismo.
From the beginning to the end, Jesus was concerned about the whole of the Old Testament, and he said, it speaks of me, and I've come to fulfill that.
Isus je uvijek bio obazrivan u Starom Zavjetu i govorio iz njega i rekao, ja sam ga došao ispuniti.
But another way, and the most common way that the term law was used in the time of Jesus, was what we call the oral law.
Ali najučestaliji način na koji se koristi termin zakon je usmeni zakon.
The oral law was the scribal law.
Znači onaj usmeni zakon je zapravo pismeni zakon.
And as it says up on the screen, it was the most common meaning for law in the days of Jesus.
Pismeni zakon je bio najčešće značenje zakona za Židove u Isusovo vrijeme.
Now, a few things about this. This law was never written down. Well, it was finally written down in about 200 AD. But in the time of Jesus, it was only passed down word of mouth to students.
A nekoliko stvari u tome, on nikada nije bio zapisan, nego je prenošen za sjećanje i on je bio otprilike zapisan negdje 200 godine.
In fact, the rabbis refused to have it written down.
Rabini su odbili da bude zapisan. It was the interpretation or
not so much the interpretation, but making clear from their perspective the simple commands and laws of God.
To je bila interpretacija jednostavnih zakona.
So let me explain how it worked.
Dajte da vam objasnim kako je to funkcioniralo.
Scribal law sought to give specific rules and regulations to the general law of the Torah.
Znači, pismeni zakon je nastojao dati posebna pravila i propise općem zakonu u Tori.
From the law of God, that is, from the Old Testament statements, the scribes sought to make clear by giving it rules and regulations for all of life.
Od Božeg zakona, znači to su te starozavjetne izjave, pismoznanci su nastojali načiniti pravila i propise za čitav život.
Now, through their study, they discovered that there were over 248 specific commands in the Old Testament.
Iz nekih studiranja imamo činjenicu da je bilo više od 248 izjava.
These are things you must do.
To su neke izjave koje su označavale nešto što morate činiti.
And then there were 365 prohibitions. This you may not do.
I bilo je 365 stvari koje nisu smjeli raditi.
And when Jesus says, "You have heard it said," he's talking about oral law.
Isusova izjava, čuli se da je rečeno, identificira pismeni zakon.
Now, let me explain how they work this out.
Dajte da malo to više objasnim.
We'll take as an example the commandment, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. In it you shall do no work.
Počet ćemo sa zakonom koji kaže, spomeni se da dana subotnjega, da ga držiš svetim, tada ne bi trebao raditi nikakva posla.
So here's the question.
Stoga postavljam pitanje.
What do we mean by work?
Što mislimo kad govorimo o radu?
What is work?
Što je rad?
We can't keep this command unless we really understand what it means to work.
Ne možemo održavati to pravilo ako zaista ne razumijemo što znači rad.
And so they created all kinds of explanations about what work was.
I tada su došli sa puno pravila što to rad znači.
In fact, there are books written now by rabbis that define what work is.
Zapravo sada imamo napisane knjige od rabina što znači zapravo rad.
As an example, to carry a burden is to work.
Na primjer, nositi teret.
That is to carry a burden on the Sabbath. To write on the Sabbath is work.
Znači nositi teret na šabat, pisati šabatom.
Particularly if you're a scribe.
Naravno, ako ste i bili pismoznanci.
To heal somebody, that is to make them well on the Sabbath. If you're a doctor or a healer, that's work.
Ili liječiti šabatom ako ste bili doktor ili ako ne bilo potrebno liječenje.
To harvest or plant on the Sabbath is work.
Žeti i sijati, pridonositi šabatom.
Now, that wasn't good enough.
To nije bio čak dovoljno.
If you can't carry a burden, what constitutes a burden?
No, ako ne možete nositi teret, što zapravo da te teret znači?
And they really worked on this. They said that anything that is heavier than a dried fig is a burden.
Tada su puno radili na tome i došli su se zaključen da sve što je teže od suhe smokve.
Now, if you're to carry liquid, anything that's more than just one mouthful of milk is a burden. You can't do that.
I znači dovoljno mlijeka da se odjednom proguta je već teret.
To write, if you write more than 2 letters or 2 words, it's work.
Ako zapišete više od 2 slova, od 2 riječi, to se već podrazumijeva pod radom.
Oh, but they were more specific than that about this. If you wrote with paint or permanent ink, it was work.
Ako ste i pisali sa pisakom tintom, to je već se podrazumijevalo radom.
But you could write on the sand or in chalk, and go away, and so it's not permanent, it's not work.
Ali mogli ste pisati na pijesku, jer bi to vrlo brzo otišlo i bilo samo trenutno. I nisu to smatrali radom.
Now, you could not heal. Remember, Jesus got in trouble about healing all the time.
Upamtite, nije se smjelo liječiti, ozdravljati. Isus je ušao u neke nevolje kada je ozdravljao nas.
Oh, no, they really worked on this.
Zbilja su se potrudili od tih pravila.
If somebody was in an accident, or if he had a wound, he'd been hurt himself, you could put a clean bandage on it just to stop the bleeding.
Ako je netko bio u nesreći, ako je krvario, mogli se samo staviti čistu gazu.
But you could not put any medicine on the bandage.
Ali niste mogli na taj zavoj staviti nikakav lijek.
Because that's healing.
Jer je to već liječenje.
They went so far as to say, if you have an earache, if your ear is hurting,
ako vas je boljelo uho,
you can put some cotton or a dry cloth in your ear.
Mogu se staviti vate ili suhi ručnik u svoje uho.
But if you put medicine on the cloth and put it in your ear, that's healing and that's forbidden.
Ali ako se stavili lijek na tu vatu ili ručnik, to je već bilo liječenje.
Now they spent days trying to figure out just what was work for the Sabbath.
Oni su proveli dane u razmatranju što je zapravo posao, što je rad u vrijeme šabata.
And they did this for every law and command of God.
I to su činili za svaki zakon i naredbu Božju.
This was scribal, this was oral law.
To je bilo usmeni zakon.
And when Jesus says in the rest of this material, you have heard it said,
kada je Isus rekao, rečeno vam je i čuli ste,
he's talking about scribal law.
On govori o pismenom zakonu.
Now the way they proved it was correct is they would say, Rabbi Hillel, this is what he said.
Kako bi to dokazali, oni su se pozvali na rabine i rekli su, oni su to rekli.
And this is what Rabbi Abraham said about what Hillel said, and so that becomes law.
Tako da su se oni pozvali na ono što je rabin Abraham rekao, a rabin Abraham je to vrijeme citirao opet nekog drugog rabina.
There were so many rules that people simply could not keep them on.
Bilo je toliko pravila da ih ljudi nisu mogli sve izvršavati.
The group called the Pharisees,
ali grupa zvana farizeji,
they were laymen, they were not the theologians necessarily.
Oni nisu bili veliki teolozi.
They worked doing other things.
Oni su radili neke druge stvari.
But all of their spare time was given to learning what all of these rules are, and they committed to keeping them.
Ali svo vrijeme su trošili da nauče što ta pravila znače i bili su privrženi njima.
Jesus is going to have something to say about all of that.
Ali Isus ima nešto reći o svemu tome.
And you remember he's already said that blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness.
Upamtite da je on već rekao da su blagosloveni oni koji gladuju za time.
You see, being righteous before God and before men is very important to be part of the kingdom.
Upamtite da biti pravedan ispred Boga i ljudi je jako važno za kraljevstvo.
But then he will say, in this verse we looked at a minute ago, unless your righteousness is greater than the scribes and the Pharisees.
Osim ako je vaša pravednost veća od pismoznanaca i farizeja.
You cannot enter the kingdom of heaven.
Ne možete ući u Božje kraljevstvo.
I can imagine the disciples thought to themselves, there is no way that I can be part of that.
Mogu zamisliti kako su učenici govorili među sobom, nema šanse da uđemo u Božje kraljevstvo.
Jesus has already been accused of breaking the law, but he says, I came not to break it, not to abolish it, not to change it, but I came to fulfill it.
Ali pamtite da je Isus došao ne da ga poništi, nego da ga ispuni.
And what he was talking about was the law of God, not man's interpretation of that law.
Ono što on govorio je Božji zakon, a ne ljudska interpretacija.
Scripture says that he kept all of God's law. No sin was in him.
Pismo kaže da on održava sav Božji zakon i nije bilo grijeha u njemu.
And both in his words and what we're going to talk about now, and in his life, he interpreted what God's law really means.
I u njegovom životu je uvijek interpretirao što Božji zakon znači riječima i djelom.
But then he also said, it is not just enough for you to know the law and to obey the law, but you must also teach others to know the law and obey the law.
Znači, nije dovoljno, Isus je govorio da nije dovoljno samo izvršavati i slušati o zakonu, nego učiti druge o zakonu.
I want you to look at this passage of scripture that Jesus says now.
A želim da pogledate u ovaj odjeljak o kojem je Isus govorio.
He says, anyone who breaks one of the least of the commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven.
Tako, tko god prekrši i najmanje od ovih zapovjedi i uči druge da tako čine, bit će najmanji u kraljevstvu nebeskom.
But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven.
A tko bude izvršavao zapovjedi i učio druge da tako čine, bit će velik u kraljevstvu nebeskom.
But then there are these words that are so challenging. He says, for I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven.
A sljedeće je vrlo izazovno i kaže, jer kažem vam, ako ne budete bolji od učitelja zakona i farizeja, nećete ući u kraljevstvo nebesko.
I can imagine that the disciples thought to themselves, now wait, there have been those who've counted them. As I said, there's been 248 actual commands of God in the Old Testament.
Sigurno su se učenici pitali kako mogu izvršiti tih 245 zakona i pravila.
And there are 365 prohibitions in the Old Testament.
I 365 zabrana u Starom Zavjetu.
And the scribes have worked all of their lives to make sure that there's a good fence around those. All these things that we must do are things we cannot do.
I farizeji su čitavog života htjeli biti sigurni da izvršavaju sve te zakone.
If the Pharisees are able to keep like 220 of the commands, that means I've got to keep 225 of the commands to get to heaven.
Ako su farizeji izvršavali recimo 220, tada su još si morali prebrojati koliko točno ih moraju izvršiti da bi ušli u Božje kraljevstvo.
Is that what Jesus was talking about?
Da li je to ono što je Isus podučavao?
There's a vital connection between the law of God and the kingdom of God.
Postoji vitalna povezanost između Božjeg zakona i Božjeg kraljevstva.
Greatness in the kingdom of God will be measured by conformity to the law of God.
Veličina u Božjem kraljevstvu mjerit će se po usklađenosti s istim.
Personal obedience is not enough. The disciples are to obey, but they are to teach others to obey what God is saying.
Osobna poslušnost nije dovoljno, učenici moraju poučavati.
Now he said this at the beginning, at the end of his life, before he ascended. Remember, he called his disciples together and he gave them what we call the Great Commission, the Great Commandment, the Great Commission.
Sjetite se da je na kraju, kada je uskrsno vratio se, dao je učenicima veliko poslanje.
He said, you're to make these disciples. And after you've made the disciples, after you've called people are willing to become a disciple, you're to baptize them.
Rekao je, kada pozovete ljude i postanu učenici, morate ih krstiti.
And then you're to teach them everything that I've commanded you.
I morate ih učiti sve što sam zapovjedio.
Now that's the way we normally read what Jesus says.
To je način na koji uobičajeno čitamo ono što je Isus rekao.
But that's not what Jesus said.
Ali to nije ono što je Isus rekao.
He said, you're the disciple, you're to baptize those who become disciples, and then you're to teach them to obey, to do everything that I've said.
Ali on je rekao da kada ih učinite učenicima, krstite ih, morate ih naučiti da izvršavaju sve što sam vam rekao.
You see, what Jesus called his disciples to do at the very beginning and at the end of his ministry is not only to know what Jesus was telling them to do, but they're to teach people how to do what Jesus said do.
Vidite, ono što on rekao na početku i na kraju svoje službe nije samo ono što je zapisano i rekao da ih učini učenicima, nego da izvršavaju ono što on govorio.
We call that training.
To zovemo
Training, to train somebody.
Zovemo to treniranje, trening.
Igor is a musician. He's a teacher of music.
Igor je glazbenik, on uči glazbu.
Now, the truth of the matter is, music is really pretty simple stuff.
Istina je da je zapravo glazba vrlo jednostavna.
You can teach somebody the principles of music pretty quickly.
Možete nekoga naučiti principe glazbe vrlo brzo.
But just because a person knows about music does not make him a musician.
Ali činjenica ako osoba zna o glazbi ne čini to glazbenikom.
He must learn to sing the song or play the instrument, and it's in the playing, it's in the teaching them how to do the music that really makes him a musician.
Osoba može naučiti pjevati ili svirati glazbu, ali zapravo je poanta u tom trenutku.
Now Jesus said at the beginning, as he talks to his disciples, and at the end, your responsibility is to help people to become a disciple.
Isus je na početku i na kraju službe rekao vaša odgovornost da činite učenike.
And after they become a disciple and been empowered by the Holy Spirit, we'll talk about that.
I nakon što su postali učenici i bili opremljeni Duhom Svetim,
you're to train these disciples how to do what I have asked you to do.
Morate ih učiti da izvršavaju ono što sam i ja od vas tražio.
Now, I confess to you as I've looked at this,
moram priznati kada sam to gledao,
this has been my greatest single failure.
To je bio jedan od najvećih grijeha mojih.
And quite honestly, in most of the churches that I've worked with few exceptions, it's been the church's failure.
I moram priznati da u većini crkva koja sam ja radio, uz par iznimka, svaka crkva je pogriješila u tome.
I think we've worked hard at telling people about Jesus.
A mi smo naučeni da kažemo ljudima o Isusu.
And in classes, we've even really told people what Jesus wants them to do.
I na nekim predavanjima smo im znali govoriti što smo čuli da je Isus rekao da oni čine.
But what we have not done is shown people how to do what Jesus told them to do.
Ali nismo učinili to da smo im rekli što Isus želi od njih da čine.
Do you understand the difference? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Da li razumijete razliku?
And here Jesus says
Isus je rekao
that not only are you to obey my law, my rules,
ne samo da morate poslušati moj zakon,
but you are to teach others
nego morate učiti druge
to do what I've asked you to do.
Da čine ono što sam ja zapovjedio.
An entrance into the kingdom requires better conformity to the law of God than what the scribes and Pharisees did.
I ulazak u kraljestvo zahtijeva bolju usklađenost s Božjim zakonom nego što su imali pismoznanci i farizeji.
And so as I mentioned, I say this, I'm sure perhaps you're thinking, Tom, you're saying something that's impossible.
Sigurno kad ovo govorim, pomislite Tom, ti govoriš nešto što je nemoguće.
Better than the scribes and the Pharisees? How is that possible?
Bolje od pismoznanaca i farizeja, kako je to moguće?
The scribes and Pharisees were all concerned about external keeping of the law.
Farizeji i pismoznanci su htjeli izvršavati čitav zakon.
They asked, as many of my students have asked in the past, they said, what is the absolute minimum that I must do to be able to get to heaven?
Oni su ga uvijek pitali, ono što su i mene moji učenici prije pitali, što je apsolutni minimum što trebam izvršiti da dođemo u Božje kraljestvo.
It's like my students, I would say, you need to write a paper about something.
Naprimjer, to je kad bih ja svojim učenicima rekao, morate napraviti i napisati seminar.
And the first question always that was raised was, how many pages does it have to be?
I prvo pitanje koje su postavili uvijek je bilo koliko stranica to treba biti.
They're all concerned with what they have to do to get by instead of trying to learn something.
Oni su se uvijek brinuli što moraju napraviti do ove 5 umjesto da nešto nauče.
That's why they were so careful to try to define everything, because they wanted to make sure they kept externally the law.
Tako da su oni bili zabrinuti da izvršavaju čitavo pravo, čitav zakon.
But Jesus is not concerned about the external aspect of the law. He's concerned about the heart. He's concerned about obeying from the heart. And he's going to explain what that looks like.
Isus nije zabrinut za izvršavanje čitavog zakona, on se brine za srce.
The disciples' righteousness, that which really pleases God, is an inward righteousness, one that is of the heart and mind.
Ona pravednost koju učenici treba imati je ona koja izlazi iz srca.
Remember, God looks on the heart, man looks on the outward appearance.
Sjetite se da Bog gleda u srce, a ljudi gledaju na vanjski izgled.
Now, two promises. You really need to circle this in the material that I've given you. Think about this.
Molim vas da ovo zaokružite u materijalima koje sam vam dao.
One is found in Jeremiah, the 31st chapter, the 33rd verse.
Jedan je u Jeremiji u 31. poglavlju.
Under the new covenant, this is what is promised.
U Novom savezu ovo je obećano.
I will put my law within them and write it on their hearts.
Ja ću staviti novi zakon u njihova srca.
Now, how is this possible?
Kako je to moguće?
Well, here's the word from Ezekiel.
I evo riječi od Ezekijela.
I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my ways.
Ja ću staviti svoj duh u vas i učinit ću da hodate mojim putovima.
The truth of the matter is, this greater righteousness of the heart can only come about through the new birth.
Istina je da ta nova pravednost može doći jedino iz novog rođenja.
Because two things will take place.
Jer će se dogoditi dvije stvari.
The Holy Spirit will cause us to want to know God better and seek to understand Him.
Duh Sveti će prouzročiti u nama da želimo više saznati o Bogu.
Indeed, Jesus said in John chapter 14, He said, when the Comforter comes, He's going to remind you of everything that I've said.
I Isus je rekao Ivanu 14 da kada tješitelj dođe, on će vas podsjetiti na sve stvari.
And He's going to give you the power to keep what I've asked you to do.
I da će vam moć da držite sve ono što sam vas pitao da činite.
So, Jesus now, in the rest of the chapter, we're going to go through this after the break. He's going to give us several examples of what He means by keeping the command from the heart.
Isus nam je dao par primjera što znači držati taj zakon zapravo iz srca.
He doesn't quote the rabbis of the past.
On ne citira rabine iz povijesti.
He's not concerned with oral scribal law.
On nije zabrinut za usmen zakon.
He's going to say, now you've heard it said that you're not supposed to do something or you are supposed to do something.
On uvijek kaže rečeno je da trebate činiti tako.
But he will say instead, I say to you, this is the way it's to be.
Ali on kaže rečeno vam je, ovo je način na koji trebate činiti.
We'll look at those right after the break. Have some coffee.
Nakon pauze ćemo pogledati dalje primjere. Isus govori kako se treba održavati zakon i njega govori kako ga nije došao ukinuti, nego ispuniti.
And he says to his disciples, you need to know it and you need to keep it also.
I rekao svojim učenicima da bi oni to isto trebali znati i izvršavati.
But you're not going to do it like the scribes and Pharisees.
Ali to nećete činiti kao što čine pismoznanci i farizeji.
And he's going to give us now 5 examples in the rest of the chapters.
I
Chapter 5.
daće nam još 5 primjera u ostatku ovih poglavlja.
Now, it's very important that I say something right here that you need to hear.
Nešto vrlo važno što vam želim reći.
Remember, Jesus gave us the Beatitudes before he started talking about this is what you got to do.
Upamtite da nam Isus dao blaženstva prije nego je rekao ono što morate činiti.
You see, the truth is, we don't do these things in order to get into the kingdom, or in order to become a Christian. It's if we have committed our life to Jesus, we're going to do these things as a demonstration that we are following Jesus.
Upamtite da to ne činimo samo kako bismo izvršavali, ili jer moramo, nego to činimo jer smo postali sljedbenici Isusa Krista.
Sometimes we want to make what Jesus taught another set of rules that we have to do to try to be pleasing to God.
Nekada želimo iz Isusovih pravila napraviti nešto čime možemo doprijeti ili udovoljiti Bogu.
We're already pleasing to Him if we have given our heart, our lives to Jesus.
Već smo došli bliže njemu ako smo dali svoj život Isusu.
Remember, He's giving these instructions to those who have committed to following Him.
Upamtite da on je dao ta pravila ljudima koji su njegovi.
You don't tell people out there in the world, this is what you must do so that you can follow Jesus.
Ne kažete ljudima vani u svijetu, ovo je ono što trebate činiti, da slijedite Isusa.
We become disciples, we become followers of Jesus, we commit our hearts, our lives to Him, and then He does something to our heart, but once He's done something to our heart, we are to live like this.
Mi, kada postanemo učenici Isusa, obvezujemo se da ćemo živjeti i izvršavati i biti poput njega.
These are not rules so that we can become a follower of Jesus. We become a follower of Jesus, and then through His power, we begin to keep His law. Do you understand the difference?
Da li razumijete razliku da ne izvršavamo zakon da bismo postali njegov, nego već smo njegovi pa to izvršavamo?
That's why I made so much the first session to say these instructions are for Jesus followers, for redeemed, for transformed, people who have experienced the new birth.
Zato sam na prvom satu rekao da su ta pravila za novorođene, za one koji slijede Isusa, oni koji su predali svoj život njemu.
That's why that passage in Jeremiah and in Ezekiel is so important for us to remember.
Zato su reci iz Ezekijela i Jeremaja jako važni da ih upamtimo.
He wants to put His law in our heart, and the reason He does that, or the way He does that, is He puts the giver of the law in our heart.
On želi da stavimo u svoje srce zakon.
Jesus comes to live inside of us.
Isus dolazi živjeti unutar nas.
And Ezekiel says, I'm going to put my spirit within you so that you can walk in my ways.
Ezekiel kaže, stavit ću svoj duh u vas tako da možete hodati.
But if we've been given the power, if Jesus is living in us, we have the responsibility to listen and do what Jesus said to do.
Ali ako smo predali svoj život i imamo moć Duha Svetoga, imamo odgovornost činiti ono što znamo.
And you can do it.
I naravno možete to činiti.
And you can do it better tomorrow than you did it today.
I to možete bolje činiti sutra nego što ste učinili danas.
And the more you walk with Him, the better you will do it.
I ako što više hodate sa njim, to ćete bolje činiti.
Okay. Now, he's going to begin to give some examples about what he's talking about.
Evo nekoliko primjera o čemu je zapravo govorio.
He begins first, he says in verse 21, I don't have it for the screen, but he says, you have heard it said to people long ago, do not murder.
Čuli ste da je rečeno starima, ne ubi.
Anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.
I tko god ubije, bit će podvrgnut sudu.
He says, but I tell you that if anyone is angry with his brother, will be subject to the judgment.
A ja vam kažem, svaki koji se bez razloga srdi na brata svojega, bit će podvrgnut sudu.
Anyone who says to his brother, Raka, is answerable to the Sanhedrin.
I tko god rekne bratu svojemu šupljoglavče, bit će podvrgnut vijeću.
But anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell.
A tko god rekne luđeće, bit će podvrgnut paklu ognjenome.
You see, what the scribes and the Pharisees did is they said, murder. If I've not killed anybody, then I've kept the law.
Vidite što su pismozanci i farizeji, za što su se ulovili, kada su rekli ako nismo nikoga ubili, održali smo zakon.
That's external.
To je nešto u čemu su oni pretjerivali.
Jesus says, no, it's about the heart.
A Isus je rekao, ovdje se radi u srcu.
Unrighteous anger, that is anger from pride or hatred or malice, anger that seeks revenge from the heart, that's murder.
Nepravedna srdžba zbog ponizna mržnja je pakosti bijesa koja traži osvetu iz srca.
Now, sometimes we read the Ten Commandments say, you shall not kill.
Nekad čitamo iz 10 zapovjedi, zapovjed koja kaže ne smijete ubiti.
You need to understand that there's the Greek word that is used here is to murder, that is to intentionally take another person's life.
Morate razumjeti da je upotrebljena hebrejska riječ koja predstavlja ozbiljnu intenciju da nekome oduzmete život.
It's premeditated, it's wanting to do that person in, to kill them.
Znači želite završiti život te osobe, ubiti je.
But Jesus is saying, hey, have you ever thought to yourself, I just wish he were dead?
Da li ste pomislili da bi Isus nekad pomislio samo želim da je ta osoba mrtva?
Ever been so angry with someone that you just wish they didn't exist?
Da li misli da je Isus nekada bio toliko ljude poželio da ta osoba uopće ne postoji?
Jesus said that's murder.
Isus je rekao to je ubojstvo.
And he gives a couple of examples. He talks about the way we speak about people.
I daje nekoliko primjera. Recimo, jedan od njih je kako govorimo o ljudima.
This word raka in the Arabic means empty. It's like saying, you're just stupid. You're just an empty head. It's like saying, you're just a dunce.
Ova riječ raka znači prazan, ona vrijeđa i ona predstavlja nekoga ko je glup ili šupljaka.
It's disrespecting a person and saying that he just is worthless mentally.
Ta riječ ne poštuje osobu i ona govori o tome da osoba jednostavno nije inteligentna, ona je glupa.
I've been really convicted about that because there's some people that I strongly disagree with in the United States right now.
Ja sam uvjeren da postoje ljudi koji se suprotstavljaju mome mišljenju.
And I've caught myself saying, he is so stupid.
I ja sam sebe čak ulovio kad sam znala reći za neke ljude, on je toliko glup.
Jesus says, hey, you got a heart problem.
A Isus kaže, hej, ti imaš problem srca.
What he is saying may be stupid.
Ono što on kaže je možda glupo.
Or she is saying.
Ili što ona kaže.
It may be uninformed, it may be self-centered and all of that, but it's one thing to talk about what they say, but to speak about them in a way that you wish they were dead, that's murder. Jedno je govoriti o njima da su sebični, da oni prepuno govore o sebi, a druga stvar je kada ružno pričamo o njima, to je ubojstvo. The other word he uses is you fool.
A druga riječ koju koristi je budala.
And in the Jewish thinking, it's a little different from what we normally think. You remember, Scripture says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God.
Sjetit ćete se da pismo kaže, da budala kaže nema Boga.
And so really kind of, I think what Jesus is saying is, anyone who acts and who lives as kind of an outcast, someone who has no morals, that's, if you call a person like that, then that's dangerous.
Znači, opasno je ako osobu zovemo budala, to znači onaj ko je odbačen ili onaj koji nema morala.
Angry thoughts, insulting words, angry thoughts, insulting words about people is murder in God's sight.
Znači, zlobne misli i uvredljive riječi o ljudima su zapravo ubojstvo u očima Božjim.
Now I confess, I would rather have somebody say things like that about me than kill me.
Moram priznati da neko kaže i to o meni, je to da me ubio.
We're talking about the heart.
Ali mi govorimo o srcu.
And Jesus says, as my disciples, you're going to treat people, and you're going to think about people the way I treat people and the way I think about people.
A Isus je rekao svojim učenicima, ako ste moji, onda ćete tretirati ljude kao što ih ja tretiram. Po tome će znati da ste moji učenici.
It's a matter of the heart.
Vidite, to je pitanje srca.
The problem is that out of the heart, the mouth speaks.
Problem je da iz srca izlazi, da usta govore ono što izlazi iz srca.
Or, Scripture says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he.
Ili pismo kaže da ono što čovjek misli, zapravo to misli iz srca.
Are you a murderer from the heart?
Da li ste vi ubojica iz svog srca?
Or like Jesus, do you want to bring life?
Ili kao Isus želite donijeti život?
I woke up thinking this morning how hard it's going to be to talk about this.
Ovog jutra sam pomislio kako će biti teško govoriti o tome.
Because I found myself so guilty.
Jer mislim da sam ja toliko kriv.
But the good news is I can repent, and because of this, He's going to help me.
Ali dobra vijest je da se mogu pokajati i da će mi on pomoći.
To think differently and speak differently.
Mogu misliti drugačije i govoriti drugačije.
Now we're not talking about saying that what somebody says or does is right and good, but we're talking about maligning them as a person.
Ne govorimo o onome što netko misli ili čini, nego govorimo o onoj osobi o kojoj zapravo ne smijemo govoriti ružno.
I just wish he were dead.
Ne smijemo reći poželio bih da je mrtav.
That's murder from the heart.
To je ubojstvo iz srca.
That's just one example. He then gives us another example.
Imamo još jedan primjer.
He says, if you've heard it said that, well, before he does that, he says, if you have you remember you've got something wrong against your brother, you need to just forget the worship, go and make things right with your brother, and then come back to worship. That's verse 23.
Znači u retku 23 kaže, ako dakle prinosiš svoj dar na žrtvenik i onda se sjetiš da brat tvoj ima nešto protiv tebe, ostavi svoj dar od nje pred žrtvenikom, pa idi, najprije se izmiri svojim bratom i onda dođi i prinosi svoj dar.
And then he gives, he talks about, just life with the pagans, with people out there that are not the disciples.
I govori o životu sa poganima, sa ljudima koji su u svijetu, koji nisu učenici.
He says, if you know that someone's got a problem with you or you owe somebody something, go take care of that.
A govori o tome, ako znaš da netko ima problem s tobom, idi pobrini se za to.
Because you need to treat that person, that situation, the way God wants to treat that person and that's his situation.
Trebate tretirati tu osobu kao što bi Bog činio i tretirao tu osobu.
And think of all kinds of real examples and just recently in my own life about this.
Baš sam nedavno razmišljao o tome u svom osobnom životu.
But when you know that somebody's got a problem with you, you need to go and take care of that.
Ali ako znate da netko ima problem s vama, trebate ići i trebate govoriti i pobrinuti se.
Let me move on quickly. He talks about adultery.
Nadalje vidimo da se govori o prijevari.
He says, now you have heard it said, again, he's quoting Causal Law.
Opet on citira pismeni zakon i kaže, čuli se da je rečeno,
do not commit adultery.
Kaže, nemojte učiniti preljub.
Now the scribes and the Pharisees really had worked this thing out.
Znači, pismoznanci i farizeji su se zbilja potrudili oko ovoga.
They went on into chapter 21 of Exodus where Moses says, if your wife has an unseemly thing or she has done an unseemly thing, you can give her a bill of divorcement.
To ide dalje u izlazak 20 i citirali su znači citira se da se ne smije žena otpustiti bez pravog razloga.
But if you give her a bill of divorcement and she marries someone else,
ali ako se razvedete od nje i ona se uda za nekog drugog,
and he divorces her,
i on se razvede od nje,
and you want to take her back as wife,
i vi ju želite nazad uzeti za ženu,
you can't do that.
Više to ne možete učiniti.
That's Exodus chapter 21.
To je iz izlaska 21.
Now, God was giving a permission because of Jesus says their hard hearts.
Isus je dao dozvolu zbog srca, jer je stvar srca.
He wasn't really talking about that you have to give her a bill of divorcement.
Nije zapravo govorio o tome da je moraš ju otpustiti.
And I'll say some more about this in a minute.
I još nešto o tome ću reći sa nekoliko trenutaka.
But specifically in this passage,
ali baš u ovom retku,
he talks about the heart where adultery comes from.
On govori o srcu iz kojeg zapravo prijevara dolazi.
He says adultery, the act of adultery, is preceded by fantasies and thinking of the heart and the mind.
On kaže da preljubu prethode maštanja u srcu i umu.
He says if you look, he's speaking specifically to men, but the principle is true for women also. If you look at another person and lust after them, you've committed adultery already in your heart.
On ovdje se vraća muškarcima, ali isto vrijedi za žene. Ako samo očima pogledaš i žudiš za drugom ili drugim, počinio si prijevaru.
And Jesus is taking it past about people who are married. He says, I'm not talking about somebody's wife or somebody's husband. He says, I'm talking about any woman or man.
Isus je to malo proširio, nije samo govorio o oženjenim muškarcima i ženama, nego rekao da govori o bilo kome.
If you look and begin to have lust in your heart,
ako gledate i počnete imati požudu u srcu,
you've already committed adultery.
Već ste počinili preljub.
Because you see, the actions begin in the heart.
Vidite, djela započinju u srcu.
Jesus is dealing here in all these situations, he's dealing with the heart.
Isus se ovdje suočava sa djelama srca.
And he's talking about purity of heart.
On govori o čistoći srca.
And then he has these two illustrations.
I tada nam daje dvije ilustracije.
If your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out.
Ako te tvoje oko sablažnjava, možeš ga izvaditi.
If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off.
Ako te tvoja desna ruka sablažnjava, odsjeci je i baci od sebe.
If your foot causes you to sin, cut it off.
Ako te tvoje tijelo ili noga sablažnjava, baci je.
Now, I'm not seeing very many disciples who have gouged out their eyes or cut off their hands. Have you?
Ja nisam vidio mnogo učenika koji su odrezali noge ili iskopali oči.
Is that really what Jesus is saying?
Da li je to ono što Isus uči?
How do we apply this?
Kako možemo to aplicirati?
You can choose what you're going to look at.
Vi možete izabrati u ono što ćete gledati.
You can choose what you're going to let your hands do.
Možete izabrati čime ćete zaprljati ruke.
You can choose where your feet's going to carry you.
Možete izabrati na čemu će vaše noge stati.
Guard your foot.
I pazite na svoje korake.
Guard your hand.
Pazite na svoje ruke.
Guard your eyes.
Pazite na svoje oči.
You don't play with this sin, with this possibility of adultery or lust. The closer you get to it, the more you're going to get burned.
Ne igrate se sa grijehom, sa požudom, jer što ćete bliže joj doći, opeći ćete se.
Let me give you an example of pornography, which has become such a problem in the world.
Dajte da vam dam primjer pornografije koja je postala toliko poznata u svijetu.
It's addictive.
Ona, znači, stvara...
Whether men or women look at it, you look at it, and then you want some more.
Pornografija stvara ovisnost i želite još više.
And then you want some more.
I želite još više.
And the stimulation yesterday, you're going to have a little more, and you're going to want more. So people become addicted to it.
Uvijek želite više i više i ljudi postaju ovisni o tome.
Better close the eyes.
Bolje da zatvorite oči.
Better turn the computer off. Hand.
Bolje da ugasite kompjuter.
Better to watch where your feet go.
Bolje da pazite gdje vaše noge kreću.
See, Jesus is using exaggeration, but even in the exaggeration, it's speaking to us. What do your hands do? Where do your feet take you? Where your eyes look at?
Isus ovdje namjerno pretjeruje, ali žele naglasiti da shvatimo gdje naše oči gledaju, gdje naše noge i ruke idu.
Again, things emanate right from the heart.
Znači, te stvari dolaze baš ravno iz srca.
And then, since he's there, he said, let's talk about marriage just a bit.
I tada je nešto govorio o braku.
He says, this adultery business, this is not all he's going to say about adultery.
Znači, ovo nije sve što Isus govorio o prijevari.
You remember, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but it's in the same context. The Pharisees came to him on one occasion and said, can a man divorce his wife for any reason at all?
Znate da su jednom farizeji pitali Isusa da li se može čovjek razvesti samo tako od žene?
And they quoted Exodus chapter 21.
I citiran je Izlazak 21. poglavlje.
But again, the question is, what do we mean by an unseemly thing?
Ali pitanje je što mislimo na bezgrešne stvari.
In the context, obviously, he's talking about a sexual activity.
I naravno u kontekstu vidimo da se govori o seksualnom kontekstu.
But the rabbis had really argued about this.
Ali rabini su zapravo diskutirali o tome.
One of the rabbis, it was even in Jesus' day, his name was Hillel, said that an unseemly thing was anything that displeased her husband.
Znači, rabin u Isusovo vrijeme je rekao da je već grijeh sve što ne poštuje njenog muža.
If she stopped being attractive for him, that's unseemly. He could put her away.
Znači, ako ona prestane biti atraktivna svojem mužu, može ju znači otpustiti.
If she wasn't a good cook, unseemly, put her away.
Znači, ako nije dobra kuharica, može ju otpustiti.
Whatever bothered the husband was an unseemly thing, just put her away.
Sve što nije bilo dobro za supruga, što je žena činila, on je mogao otpustiti.
You see, the Pharisees were concerned about how could they get away with something
Farizeji su se
and still
brinuli
keep the law,
kako mogu izaći na kraj sa nečim i svejedno poštivati zakon.
the Pharisees regarded divorce very lightly.
Farizeji su olako shvaćali razvod.
Jesus regarded marriage seriously.
Ali Isus je shvaćao brak vrlo ozbiljno.
You see the difference?
Da li vidite razliku?
As pastor, I had people come and say, she did this, he did that, so is that grounds for divorce?
Ja kao pastor često čujem, ona je učinila ovo, on je učinio ovo, da li su to razlozi da se rastanemo?
And that's such a holy thing, I almost hated to get involved in it.
To je toliko sveta stvar da ponekad čak i ne volim ulaziti u to.
Jesus gave permission if it was adultery.
Isus je dao dozvolu ako se radilo o prijevari.
But Jesus told the Pharisees, Moses gave you permission because of the hardness of your heart.
Ali Isus je rekao farizejima, Mojsije vam je dao to zbog stvari u vašem srcu.
Jesus is all concerned about reconciliation, not breaking.
Isus je zabrinut za pomirenje, a ne za rastanak.
Jesus said, you know, it was not so from the beginning. In the beginning, God created male and female so they could become one.
Isus je rekao da je u početku Bog stvorio muško i žensko da postanu jedno.
You see, it just all depends upon where you begin.
Znači, vidite da sve zapravo stvari u tome da sve počinje od početka.
Do you look for a reason so that you can break the relationship, or a reason so that you can keep the law, or do you look to see what can I do to do things God's way?
Da li samo tražite razlog da prekinete vezu, razlog da izvršavate ili ne izvršavate zakon, ili tražite razlog da činite Božje stvari?
Wish we had more time to talk about this, but Jesus at the Sermon on the Mount just speaks briefly about this. He says, it's a heart problem.
O ovim stvarima ćemo još govoriti, ali sažeto na propovedi u gori Isus govori da je to problem srca.
So guard your heart.
Tako da pazite, čuvajte svoje srce.
And then he talks about honesty.
I tada govori o iskrenosti.
He said, people, you heard it said, and it's been said to people from a long time ago, do not break your oath.
Rečeno vam je da ne smijete prevršiti svoj zakon.
Now in this case, he's not quoting one of the 10 commandments.
U ovom slučaju on ne citira 10 zapovjedi.
There are many passages in the Old Testament that talk about the importance of keeping your oath.
U Starom zavjetu postoji mnogo redaka koje govore da morate držati svoj zavjet Bogu.
Maybe he's talking about the command, or maybe they were thinking about the command, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain.
Možda je on govorio o zapovjedi koja kaže da ne biste smjeli izustiti ime Gospodnje uzalud.
So the Pharisees worked it out.
Tako da su farizeji napravili kako izaći na kraj s time.
The only oath you really had to keep was an oath that you made in the name of God.
Jedini zavjet koji morate izvršiti je onaj koji ste napravili zajedno sa Bogom.
In Matthew, the 23rd chapter, Jesus is going to talk about this some more to the Pharisees.
U Matej 23 ovome Isus više govori.
You may want to go back and look at that passage.
Možete otići u Matej 23 pogledati o čemu on govori.
The Pharisees were all concerned about what oaths were binding and what oaths were not binding.
Farizeji su se uvijek brinuli koji točno zavjeti treba biti izvršeni, koji ne.
But Jesus is concerned about his followers keeping their word.
Ali Isus je zabrinut da njegovi učenici, sljedbenici izvršavaju njegove zapovjedi.
He says, you know, the truth is that the reason we say now, I swear this in the name of God, means that I don't always speak the truth. Only when I do it in the name of God do I swear this.
Vidite, kada se kunemo Božim imenom, to može značiti da uvijek ne govorimo istinu, nego samo kada se kunemo Božim riječima.
And so they said, you know, if the Pharisees, if you swore in the name of God, or if you swore in the name of the temple, or the holy things, you had to keep your vow. If you didn't swear that way, you didn't necessarily have to.
Ako se kunete u Bože ime, u sveto ime, da trebate izvršavati zavjete. Ako ne, nije bitno.
Jesus said, my disciples will just let their yes be yes and their no no.
Isus je rekao, moji učenici samo treba reći izvršavati svoje da i svoje ne.
You don't have to swear by anything.
Ničime se ne kunite.
Because remember, I'm living in you, and when you speak in me.
Jer se sjetite, kada govorite u moje ime.
I read this passage and I thought about the passage in Colossians that I've just really struggled with, and yet I really believe. In Colossians chapter 3, he ends that chapter.
Čitao sam iz Kološana 3 i zbilja me zabrinjavao to poglavlje.
He says, whatever you do in word or in deed,
sve što činite riječju ili djelom,
you must do that in the name of Jesus Christ.
Sve to morate činiti u Isusovo ime.
The disciple of Jesus speaks differently
Isusov učenik govori drugačije
than the language of the world.
On govori drugačije nego što govori rječnik svijeta.
Now also, though it's not specifically addressing this, he's talking about those. The Pharisees were also concerned about another thing.
Farizeji su se također brinuli oko drugih stvari.
They were concerned about taking the name of God in vain, that is, making it common.
Oni su se brinuli da Bože ime ne izgovaraju uzalud.
His name is holy.
Njegovo ime je sveto.
And we've become so used to letting our language be the language of the world that we don't use, the name of Jesus is not holy, the name of God, our Father is not holy. We make senseless, painful statements.
Koliko smo se navukli da svijetu nije Isusovo Bože ime sveto, toliko to bolno.
His name is holy.
Njegovo ime je sveto.
The name of Jesus is holy.
Isusovo ime je sveto.
We must learn to guard our speech.
Moramo naučiti kako zadržati svoj govor.
Let yes be yes and your no be no.
Neka da bude da i neka ne bude ne.
If you're going to use the name of Jesus, let it be something that glorifies Him.
Ako budete koristili Isusovo ime, neka to bude nešto s čime ćete ga slaviti.
The language of His followers is different from the language of the world.
Jezik njegovih sljedbenika je drugačiji od jezika svijeta.
There's a sweetness, a sweet smell to the language of a Jesus follower.
Postoje nešto slatko u mirisu onoga kako je Isus govorio.
Is that true to you?
Da li je to istina vama?
I've had to deal with Tom as I've thought about this passage.
Ja sam se morao sam za sobom nositi kada sam razmišljao o ovim riječima.
Again, it's not about keeping the letter of the law, it's about guarding your heart.
Znači, upamtite, nije da držite svako slovo zakona, nego je stvar u srcu.
And now Jesus comes to the climax of this section.
I tada je Isus došao do ovoga u završetku.
He says, you know, Scribal Law says, you heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
Čuo se da je rečeno, which verse is that?
I'm in verse 38.
Čuo se da je rečeno oko za oko i zub za zub.
Jesus says, I've got something, you're to be different, I've got something different to say to you.
A Isus im je rekao, vi trebate biti drugačiji, ja vam imam nešto drugačije za reći.
Don't resist an evil person.
Ne opirite se zlomu.
Someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other.
Naprotiv, udaru li te tko po tvojom desnom obrazu, okrenimo i drugi.
If someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, give him your cloak as well.
I onomu koji bi se htio suditi s tobom i uzeti tvoju donju haljinu, prepusti gornju.
If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2
I
miles.
ako te tko prisili ići 1 milju, pođi s njim i 2.
Give the one who asks, and do not turn him away.
Daj onomu koji od tebe traži i ne okreni se od onoga koji tebe hoće ponajeti.
Scribal Law said, love your brother but hate your enemy.
Pismo je zakon kaže, voli svog bližnjega, a mrzi svog neprijatelja.
As you go to chapter 22 and 3 and 4 in Exodus, there's a section what we call Causal Law.
Kada idete u Izlazak 22, 23, 24,
There's instructions to a judge.
tamo postoje upute sucima.
So it's the business of restitution.
Tamo se govori o restauriranju odnosa.
If someone has taken something of yours, you take him to court, and then he has to give that back plus something.
Ako je netko uzeo nešto vaše, možete ga tužiti, otići na sud.
An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It was judgment.
To je kao oko zub za zub, to je bilo osuda.
Instructions for the judge. It was an attempt to keep there from being family feuds.
To su bilo neke upute u kojima je došlo do razaranja odnosa.
Jesus said, I've got a better way for you.
Ali Isus je rekao, imam bolji način za vas.
And the way, again, it's a matter of the heart.
Stvar je u srcu.
It's a matter of treating people the way God treats people, the way God has treated you.
Stvar je u tome kako Bog tretira ljude, kako vi tretirate druge ljude.
And the best example of this is to look at Jesus.
I najbolji primjer tome je da pogledate u Isusov primjer.
See, all the things we've talked about, if you look at the rest of the Gospels, you see Jesus fleshing these things out in his own life.
Pogledajte ostatak evanđelja, vidjet ćete da Isus zapravo sjaji tom istinom.
You see, it's all about choosing not revenge.
Vidite, radi se o tome da uvijek izabirate se ne osvećivati.
It's all about leaving vengeance to God and not claiming it yourself.
Uvijek je da prepuštate puteve Bogu i da se sami ne zauzimate za njih.
You remember as Jesus went to the cross and when he was being tried before the Sanhedrin and then before Pilate.
Sjećate se kada Isus trebao ići na križ i kada je bio ispitan pred Pilatom.
He could have exercised vengeance, couldn't he?
Mogao je uvježbati i biti zao prema ljudima.
He had all the power in the world to deal with these ungodly people.
Ima svu moć na svijetu da se nosi sa tim poganima, sa tim bezbožnim ljudima.
But he chose to leave it to the Father.
Ali on je odlučio to ostaviti Ocu.
That's what his disciples were called to do.
Kako su i učenici pozvani da čine?
Revenge, getting even,
Osveta, onda kada želimo se s nekim ujednačiti.
insisting on justice and you exercising that justice.
I kada insistiramo na pravdi, kada vježbamo tu pravdu,
It's just not the way of the disciple.
to nije način na koji učenik treba postupiti.
It's not the way of Jesus.
To nije Isusov način.
Instead, you serve the person who demands.
Umjesto toga služite osobi koja nešto zahtijeva od vas.
This second mile business, it helps us to understand something of the culture.
Ova druga milja koja je spomenuta u Mateju nas nešto uči o kulturi.
At this time, all the world was under Rome.
U to vrijeme sav svijet je bio pod Rimom.
And Roman law was that if a soldier saw you and he's carrying a pack, he can say, you carry a mile.
I kada je vojnik išao i kada ga je netko vidio drugi, on je mogao tom drugome reći, ti nosi ovo za mene.
You don't have to carry it further than a mile, but you've got to carry a mile for me.
Tada ćeš morati nositi još milju dalje od mene.
They had to do that.
On je to morao učiniti.
Or the soldier could really hurt you.
I taj vojnik vas je mogao i ozlijediti.
Jesus said, have a better way.
A Isus je rekao, imam bolji način.
You carry his pack that mile
Ti trebaš tu torbu nositi još milju.
because you have to.
Zato jer moraš.
But then you carry another mile
Ali tada je nosiš još jednu milju,
because you want to serve him.
zato što ga želiš služiti.
Some of you have heard Sandra tell the story. I was there in the context. We had a young man who came to visit us or we found out about it in California. Sandra was teaching an after-school program, and a young man who had escaped from Iran, he was one of the officers of the Shah of Iran, was in hiding, but he came to Sandra and he said, I want to go to school.
Čuli ste prije da je Sandra govorila da smo susreli u Kaliforniji kad smo živjeli jednog čovjeka koji je došao iz Irana.
Sandra said, this is school for children, not for adults.
I Sandra je podučavala 1 sat i Sandra mu je rekla da je to škola za djecu, a ne za odrasle.
He bowed his head and he kind of walked away, started to walk away.
On je pognuo glavu i otišao je nazad.
Sandra said, no, what do you need?
Ali Sandra je došla do njega i pitala ga što trebaš.
He said, Aziz, that was his name, Aziz want to learn English.
I on se zvao Aziz i Aziz je htio naučiti engleski.
Sandra said, well, I'll work with you and teach you English.
I Sandra je rekla da mu treba učiti engleskom.
And she said, what book would you like to work with?
I pitala ga je iz koje knjige bi volio učiti.
And he said, well, you Americans are Christians, maybe from the Bible.
I onda mu rekao, vi Amerikanci, vi ste kršćani, možda iz Biblije.
So they began to work through the book of Matthew.
Tako da su počeli raditi iz Evanđelja po Mateju.
And Sandra says that when they got to this portion, she was really quite concerned because she knew that Muslims really practice an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
I kada su došli do propovjedi na gori, Sandra je bila vrlo zabrinuta jer je znala da muslimani uvijek vježbaju oko za oko i zub za zub.
And so they read this passage.
Tako da su čitali taj odjeljak.
And Aziz kind of put his head in his hands.
I Aziz je stavio glavu u svoje ruke.
And Sandra didn't know what to think.
I Sandra nije se mogla snaći.
And he said, read it again.
I on je rekao, pročitaj ponovo.
And finally he said, you know, Jesus must be the Son of God.
I napokon je rekao, Isus mora da je sin Božji.
And she asked, well, why?
I ona ga je pitala zašto.
And he said, this makes so much more sense.
I on je rekao, to čini bitnu razliku.
In my religion, in my culture, if you hit me, I hit you back.
U mojoj religiji, u mojoj kulturi, ako me ti udariš, ja ću te udariti nazad.
But when I hit you back, then he gets a knife and he cuts me.
A kada ga udarim nazad, on će izvaditi nož i upotrijebit će taj nož.
And then I get a knife and I cut him.
I ja ću uzeti nož i ja ću njega izredati.
And then he gets a gun and shoots me.
I tada ako on ima pištolj,
And before I die, I shoot him.
I prije nego što ja umrem, upucat ću njega.
He said the result of all that is that everybody dies.
I rezultat toga je da svi umiremo.
But this way, it stops.
Ali na ovaj način završava.
It does.
I to zaista završava.
And these very words led in a lot of other conversations. Sandra can tell you more about the story, but led this young man who had been one of the elite guards for the Shah of Iran before the Great Revolution, led him to become a Christian.
Ali Sandra je s njim nastavila učiti, možete više od nje saznati, ali toga sve dovelo da postane kršćanin.
But more than these words, if we treat people this way, it'll cause people to want to know more about Jesus.
Ali ako tretiramo ljude na taj način, oni će htjeti postati poput Isusa.
Because the way we really feel is when somebody hurts us, I want revenge, don't I?
Jer postoji način na koji kada nas netko zlijedi, mi želimo osvetu.
That's what the movies are about. That's what the TV programs are about. That's what Clint Eastwood is all about.
Možemo vidjeti na televiziji, na filmovima, da se uvijek govori o osveti.
Just going to get even.
Samo želim se izjednačiti sa tom osobom.
Jesus said, no.
A Isus je rekao, ne.
We're going to love and serve instead.
Isus je rekao, morat ćete ga voljeti i služiti mu.
Now, I've got just 6 minutes to look at the last thing Jesus says.
I sada samo želim pogledati zadnjih 5 minuta u onome što je Isus rekao.
In verse 43, he says, you have heard it said, love your neighbor but hate your enemy.
U 43. retku kaže, čulo se da je rečeno, ljubi bližnjega svojega, a mrzi neprijatelja svojega.
Jesus said, no. You need to pray for those that persecute you.
A Isus je rekao, morate moliti za one koji vas progone.
You need to love your enemy.
Morate voliti svoje neprijatelje.
Because then you'll be sons of your heavenly Father.
Jer tada ćete postati sinovi nebeskog Oca.
Love wins.
Ljubav pobjeđuje.
Revenge loses for everybody.
A osveta čini gubitak za sve.
Heard the sermon just this last week or so. The proverb is that when you do not forgive,
Čuo sam u jednoj propovjedi prošli tjedan da problem kada ne oprostite,
it's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
to je kada pijete otrov i mislite i očekujete da će druga osoba umreti.
You see, the way to conquer the enemy
Način na koji da pobjedite neprijatelja
is to love him.
je da ga volite.
The way to conquer the enemy is to love her.
Način na koji da pobjedite neprijatelja je da volite nju.
And this is where the real disciple of Jesus looks so different from the rest of the world.
I ovdje možete vidjeti da pravi Isusov sljedbenik i učenik čini razliku u svijetu, drugačije.
We don't do this so that we can become a son of God.
Mi to ne činimo da postanemo sinovi Božji.
We become a son of God by becoming a disciple of Jesus.
Nego postajemo sinovi Božji tako da postajemo učenici.
By surrendering our life to Him, by really choosing to let Him become the Lord of our life.
Kada dajemo svoj život njemu i kada izabiremo postati njegovi.
By choosing even finally death to our old culture and our old way and And by faith accepting the new life that God through Christ wants to give me.
Izabiremo smrt, znači prošlom načinu života i kulturi, izabiremo novi život.
But when that happens, you see, He places His love in our hearts.
A kada se to dogodi, on postavlja svoju ljubav u naša srca.
And what He's saying is, just let me love your enemy through you.
On zapravo kaže, dopusti mi da volim tvog neprijatelja kroz tebe.
Is that possible?
Da li je to moguće?
Sometimes we have brothers and sisters that we just really don't like very much.
Nekada imamo braću i sestre koje baš ne volimo najviše.
Jesus says, love them.
Isus je rekao, voli ih.
And don't just love them emotionally, do something, pray for them.
Ne samo da ih emocionalno volite, nego učinite nešto za njih, molite.
Ask God to bless them.
Zamolite Boga da ih blagoslovi.
And then you'll demonstrate that you really are a son of God.
I tada ćete pokazati da ste zaista Božji sin.
You said, I didn't come to abolish the law.
Isus je rekao, nisam došao ukinuti zakon.
I come to fulfill the law.
Ja sam došao ispuniti zakon.
I've come to help to live out what God really intended the law to look like.
Ja sam došao da živim baš da ispunim zakon, onako kako zakon kaže.
I've come to give you a hermeneutic, that is a way to look at the law.
Ja sam vam došao da vam dam hermeneutiku, to je način na koji da vidite zakon.
I've come to interpret the law.
Došao sam interpretirati zakon.
It's not about what the religious leaders say.
Nije onome što religijski vođe kažu.
It's about what your heart that's given to me leads you to say and do.
Nego je o srcu, što vaše srce vas vodi da kažete i činite.
Now, we don't have scribes, we're not Jews.
Mi nemamo pismoznance, nismo Židovi.
But you know, there's still this tendency of creating rules, laws, and regulations.
Ali još uvijek imamo tendenciju da imamo zakone i pravila.
I mean, if you're really a disciple, you won't do this, that, or the other, and we make up all of these rules, don't we?
Ako se zaista učini, nećete učiniti ovo ili ono. Naravno, radimo na tome da imamo mnogo pravila.
And we judge people's spirituality by whether they keep the rules that we have created.
I sudimo ljude da li slijede pravila koje smo mi izmislili.
You see, we find ourselves so much like the scribes and Pharisees in our religion, don't we?
Ponekad se možemo pronaći u pismoznancima i farizejima.
We don't want to deal with the heart. We want rules that we can follow and demand that other people follow.
Ne nosimo se sa našim srcem, nego želimo pravila koja izvršavamo mi i drugi ljudi.
Jesus would say, you've heard it said.
Isus je rekao, čuli ste da je rečeno.
At church or at camp or some other place. You've heard it said.
U crkvi, na kampu ili nekom drugom mjestu. Čuli ste da je rečeno.
But I say to you,
ali ja vam kažem,
look at your heart.
Pogledajte u svoje srce.
Deal with life from the heart.
Iz svog srca se nosite sa svojim životom.
That is a heart that I am changing, I'm renewing.
To je srce koje ja mijenjam, koje obnavljam.
I'm cleansing.
I ja ga čistim.
He gave us these examples, but there are many more that he could give.
On nam je dao te primjere, ali nam je mogao dati još mnogo primjera.
And the truth is, if we walk along with Jesus in the Gospels, you will see how over and over again he interprets the law.
Kada idemo kroz Isusova evanđelja, vidjet ćete kako je dalje interpretirao zakon.
And encourages us to come along with him.
I ohrabruje nas da dođemo sa njim.
Let's deal with the world, with ourselves, with the church, with people, from the heart.
On želi da se nosimo sa svijetom, sa ljudima, sa crkvom i bližnjima iz svog srca.
And it's going to get a little more challenging next week. Again, reading the material. See?
Ja ću vas malo više izazvati sljedeći tjedan, nastavite sa čitanjem.